Hello, and welcome to this London School of Languages webinar on teaching younger learners at higher levels. My name is Alex Webb, and I'm a teacher and teacher trainer at London School of Languages. So let's get started and let's have a look at what we mean by younger learners who have progressed to higher levels. So these are students who have progressed through the levels more quickly than their peers. Okay, so where their peers might be still at A2 or B1, these students have progressed to maybe one level, maybe even two levels above the students, other students of a similar age. Okay, and so these students are making quicker than expected progress in their English learning. Okay, so they're getting through the levels much more quickly than would normally be expected for normal students of their age. And this means as well that these students are then often taking exams earlier than would normally be expected. And so we're starting to see sort of 11, 12-year-olds sometimes taking the B2 exam, for example, or 13, 14-year-olds taking a C1 exam. And we're starting to see as well students aged 15 and 16 years old in C2 classes preparing for a proficiency exam. Okay, and so this is a big change to what we've been used to seeing and the normal ages of students we're seeing in our classes. And what this results in is that we often now have students in class who are with other, sometimes much older classmates. Okay, so we're sometimes seeing students in class with students who are maybe 2 or 3 years older than them. And in certain ways that can pose a few problems for the teacher and for the students as well. Okay, so we're going to have a little look at what kind of problems this might pose for us as teachers when we're teaching these students who have made quicker than expected progress through the levels. Okay, so yeah, you've got students in class that are younger than the rest. What kind of problems could that cause? Okay, so firstly, you might find that younger students are perhaps nervous or intimidated by being in class with older students. Okay, and I think that's quite normal. If you're 12 or 13 and then you're in a class with 15, 16-year-olds, that might be might be quite intimidating for you as a younger learner. Okay, so that's something definitely that we need to kind of think about and take into consideration. A second issue comes from on the side of the other students in the class. Older students might be a little bit put out by having to work with a younger classmate. So they might not be too happy with that. Okay, so that's something as well that we have to consider when we're making pairs, choosing the right student to work with the younger student. This is also something that could be a little bit tricky for the younger student, is that they probably don't know anybody else in the class. Okay, all of their friends from school are at lower levels, and so they just don't know anybody in the class, and so that can be a little bit of a problem as well. Yeah. Okay. Another issue is that these younger students that come up to these higher levels, although they are maybe very academically advanced, maybe in terms of their maturity, they are perhaps less mature than the other people in the class. And that can, of course, pose problems in the classroom because we have to kind of we have classroom management issues then, because older students might be frustrated by the lack of maturity shown by the younger student, and vice versa. The younger student might want to do kind of more kind of fun activities where the older students might be a little bit more serious. And so we have to kind of find a balance in our classes when we're dealing with that. Yeah. And yeah, there might also be a difference in work ethic between the younger and the older students. This could go both ways. So the younger student, as we said, might be a little bit less mature and therefore have a slightly lower work ethic than the rest of their classmates. Or it might be the other way around, that the younger student has got a very high work ethic, and that's why that they've progressed to this higher level. And then the older students in the class maybe just want to take it easy. They're not too stressed about taking the exam that year. And then the younger student might become frustrated by the lack of work ethic of the older students. And so these are all things that we need to take into consideration when we have the students in our class that are younger than the rest. Okay. So, what is the profile of one of these high achieving younger learners? Okay, let's have a look through. Okay, they tend to be highly motivated. Okay, so these younger learners, they really want to do well. Okay, they want to progress, they want to work hard, they're really keen. Okay, and yeah, generally very, very highly motivated, keen to be in class. Okay. In my experience, they can go one of two ways. They can either appear to be very confident, or they might be perhaps quite shy. Okay, it depends a little bit on the student. It also depends on the class that they've ended up in. Okay, so if they end up in a nice class, they might be very, very confident, or if they're in a class with lots of older students that are quite intimidating, you might find that these younger students are just sort of kind of, yeah, a little bit reserved, a little bit afraid to speak in front of the older students in the class. Okay. They are generally very hardworking though. Okay. They haven't achieved what they've achieved by getting to these higher levels without being hardworking. Okay. And that's something that we can almost take as a given. If they're progressing that quickly through the levels, it's clear that they work hard and they want to work hard. Often they are very, very keen to give answers, and they want to receive praise and recognition for their work. So imagine, I don't know, you've got a class of, I don't know, 16-year-olds at B2, and then you've got a 13 or 14-year-old in that class as well. Okay, it might well be that the 13, 14-year-old is putting their hand up much more often, and it's much more keen to give answers and to get praise from the teacher than the rest of the 16-year-olds who are just kind of slumped back in their chair. So, oh, don't ask me the question. And so you might find that there is a kind of a difference in attitude between these younger, high achieving students than the rest of the students in the class. Okay. And you might also find that these students get easily frustrated if there is a lack of pace or a lack of progress in the class. And so you'll find that if you've got these older students that don't really want to work very hard and they don't really want to kind of go through the activities, you might find that the younger, very, very strong student, they're getting frustrated, distracted, maybe even becoming disruptive because there is a lack of progress in the class. And so we need to kind of make sure that we make sure that the class moves along at a good pace to maintain the attention and the interest of these high achieving students that we have. Okay, but we'll talk about that a little bit more later on in the webinar. Okay. So what I wanted to do now is have a look at some real student examples. These are students that I have taught over the last couple of years, and who are examples of students that have progressed very, very quickly through the levels. Okay. So the first one we've got here is John. John was 10 years old when I taught him. He was in an A2 plus class, but then was expected to move to a B1 to pass the B1 exam, so pass preliminary, and then be in a B1 plus class next year. So preparing or starting to prepare for first certificate when he's 11 years old. Okay, and as you can imagine, most of the students in a B1 plus class are probably going to be 2, maybe even 3 years older than him. Okay, and so there are certain potential problems that we might face with a student like John in this kind of situation. Okay, so yeah, as we said, he's going to be much younger than his classmates. Okay, his peers are all in perhaps A2 plus, B1, and he's preparing for B2. Okay, he's more than likely going to be less mature than his classmates, and I can tell you with my experience with John, that was definitely the case. No, he may be unfamiliar with some of the topics at B1 plus level. Yeah, so when you're studying key, the the topics are kind of very kind of relatable for younger learners. But at first certificate, sometimes these topics, especially for a 10, 11-year-old, they might be a little bit tricky, something that he's not really familiar with. Yep. Okay. And the he may as well find that he's intimidated by the older classmates in that group. Okay, as we mentioned before. So what can we do to kind of deal with these problems? Okay, well, first of all, I think it's really important to regularly change the pairings. Okay, as we said earlier, older students might be kind of frustrated by having to work with a younger student, and so you don't want to stick the younger student with the same older student every time. So I think it's really, really important to change the pairings regularly so that John works with different partners, and then you can also kind of work out which pairing works well. And if you find a pairing that works well, then maybe that can be a regular partner for John. And if you can't find a pairing that works really well, just keep changing it up so that no one student is being frustrated by having to work with John the whole time. If there are maturity issues, rather than embarrassing the student or calling the student out in front of the whole class, what's really, really important is to take him aside, talk to him quietly, and address any behavioral issues. And I find that was a much better way of dealing with maturity issues with these younger students in classes with older ones. In terms of the topics, what's really, really important here, and this is going to be a theme throughout the webinar, is that you need to have clear, thorough lead-ins to these tricky topics. So there needs to be lots of discussion and talking about these topics before you get the students to do a piece of reading or a piece of writing. Okay, we need to give the students some background knowledge on the topic before expecting them to be able to deal with a text on it. Okay, and in terms of being intimidated by older students, in this case, it comes down to you as a teacher a little bit here to try and create a fun, friendly atmosphere in the class. Okay, the more kind of fun and friendly the atmosphere, the more likely it is that the student will feel more comfortable in the classroom. Okay, so that's something that's really, really important when we've got well, in any class really, but particularly important when we've got younger learners in a group with older ones. Okay. My next example is a student called Eleni, 11 years old. She passed B1 last year and is expected to pass B2 this year. So it's gone from B1 to B2 in a year. Okay, so she's very, very high achieving. And so at 12 years old, she's going to be at B2 plus and starting to prepare for the C1 exam. Okay, so 12 years old preparing for C1. As you can imagine, her classmates are going to be significantly older than her. So potential problems we might face with Eleni are, again, much younger than her classmates. Okay. This is something that I've experienced with her. It's different areas of interest to her classmates. So while some of her classmates are kind of interested in, I don't know, music and going to concerts and things like that, I found Eleni was still talking about Disney movies. So there were definitely different areas of interest to her classmates here. Again, maybe unfamiliar with some of the topics at B2 plus level. This is, at C1, there's no for schools version. Okay, so these topics are adult topics, and she is 12 years old. Of course, she's going to be unfamiliar with some of these topics. And the advanced reading and writing tasks are challenging, particularly the writing. Okay, there are going to be types of writing that there is no way that Eleni has experienced in the past. Okay, and so it will be really, really important to familiarize her with these before we expect her to be able to do them successfully. Okay, potential solutions to these problems, again, with the much younger than classrooms, as we said with John, regularly change the pairings, and hopefully we can find a partner that works well with Eleni. Yep. In terms of different areas of interest, I think we have to appeal to all of the students in the class here. So we have to adapt topics perhaps to make them more relevant to the younger student or to the older students, and just also have a variety of topics. Okay, so some of the topics are more relevant perhaps to the older students in the class, and some topics are more relevant to the younger students of the class. So we've got to make it fair. Okay, we can't expect Elena to just talk about all of these kind of more mature topics, but at the same time, we can't expect the older students in the class to talk about these less mature topics. So we need to have a balance and a variety in class. In terms of being unfamiliar with the topics, yeah, get students to share knowledge on the topics. Okay, older students may know quite a lot about these things, and so pair work, group work, or whole class work, brainstorming a topic is a good way to help familiarize these younger learners with the tricky topics that they might be facing in the class. Okay, and then finally, with the difficulty with these advanced reading and writing tasks, make sure that you have a very, very thorough planning stage if you're doing writing, so that the students can see what they have to do. And of course, pre-reading tasks. This is kind of like a detailed lead-in as well. Make sure that you've got detailed pre-reading tasks so that the students are familiar with the topic and with the activity as well that they have to do, so that they are, when they actually do the reading, they are actually able to do it well. Okay. So my final student example is Naya. Naya is 16 years old. She passed C1 last year and is now in a C2 class. And this is becoming more and more common, that we're seeing sort of 15, 16-year-old students reaching C2 level, at the age of 15, 16, which is incredible, really. Okay, so the level of English is getting higher and higher. Last year at London School, I think we had 6 students, all under 18, in the C2 class. Okay, and so yeah, problems that Lanaya might have. She may struggle with the complexity of the reading texts. Okay, yeah, reading texts at C2 are very, very complicated, and it's unlikely she will have read texts similar to this in previously. Some of the topics in the club covered in class at C2 level may be very unfamiliar. So at C1, we have very adult topics, but C2, they are very often very, very academic, and that can be particularly challenging for a 16-year-old. It's kind of often university level topics that we're looking at here at C2 level. In terms of writing is marked very harshly at C2 anyway, and so she may be very unfamiliar with the writing style required when we get to this level. And yeah, chances are, if you're studying C2, you're going to be in a class with adults. Okay, and 16-year-olds in a class with adults can be perhaps a little bit intimidated, a little bit shy, and that can be difficult for teenagers when they're put in class with adults. So what can we do about this? Well, we can do lots of technique training for skills activities. Okay, we need to go through the different parts of the exam that the students have to do and look at the different techniques that are required for these exams. Okay, we can't expect them to be able to deal with these reading texts immediately. Okay, we need to talk about how to approach them, what needs to be done in the different parts, and then hopefully they will get better with these reading tasks. Okay, with unfamiliar topics, again, the lead-in is crucial here. Okay, have a very thorough lead-in activity so that you can talk about the topic, introduce it, explain if necessary what it's all about, perhaps get the students to do a little bit of research themselves, and then they will be more familiar with the topic. With writing, key thing here, give them models. Okay, give them models of the writing so that they know what they have to do. They can see an example, and then when they do give you a piece of writing, detailed feedback is essential. Okay, give them detailed feedback on what they need to do to improve. Maybe in a class with adults, again, this comes down to pairing. Find pairings that work. Okay, often if the student is mature, adults have no problem being in a class with older teenagers. Okay, so find an adult that that Naya works well with, and you can pair her up with that adult, or mix the pairings up again, as we said for John and for Elene. Mix the pairings up regularly so that not one person is always working with Naya, and Naya is not always having to stuck with the same person every time in class. Okay, so there you have some 3 examples there of students who have progressed quickly through the levels. Okay, all right, so let's move on. 1 second. So what is important when teaching these high achieving learners? Okay, firstly, it's very, very important to match their ambition. As I said earlier, this might not always be the case for their classmates. Their classmates may not match their ambition. Okay, and so we as teachers need to push in the class to make sure that the lesson moves at a pace that is engaging for these students. Okay, so yeah, lessons need to move along at a good pace. Okay, you need to move at the pace of the stronger students. Otherwise, these stronger students are going to get frustrated, they're going to get bored, and then they might become disruptive in your lesson. Okay, so you need to continue to have a good pace in your lesson. Okay, you need activities that are going to push and challenge the students. Okay, so you need to be designing activities that, again, that are pushing the stronger students. And then if you have got weaker students in the class, use the stronger students to support the weaker students. They can work, you can pair up the stronger student with the weaker students and they can help them. Okay, and the students need regular, detailed feedback on the work that they are doing. Okay, particularly important for writing, but also if they're doing speaking and if they're doing any kind of task, really, regular feedback on how they're doing. If you're an ambitious student, you want to know that you're doing well, but you also want to know areas in which you can improve. Okay, so it's important as a teacher that we give the students detailed, regular feedback on how they're doing and areas for improvement, and that's the kind of thing that they are really looking for. Okay, these ambitious students. If we do have challenging topics, these need to be well prepared. I've mentioned this earlier as well. Okay, we need to have thorough, engaging lead-ins to challenging topics. So the lead-ins need to be interesting. Okay, but they also need to be very, very detailed. Okay, if you've got a reading on a topic that is going to be unfamiliar, is going to be unfamiliar to the students, okay, you need to spend a good amount of the lesson leading into that topic, providing background information so that the students know a little bit more about that topic before you start going into a reading task or a listening task on that topic. Okay, if you launch straight into the activity, the students are going to find it challenging. All right, most coursebooks do generally have a short lead-in activity. Okay, however, perhaps you need to extend this, bring in, I don't know, maybe a video or some pictures for the students to discuss, to have a look at, so that they can just think about the topic a little bit before you go into it. Okay, you might also need to pre-teach maybe some unfamiliar terms and vocabulary that come up. Okay, particularly as you get into sort of C1 and C2, this is particularly important. Okay, at B2, you've still got the for schools version, and so the terminology is kind of, yeah, young person friendly. However, C1, C2, there's going to be a lot of academic language in here, and so you may need to do some pre-teaching of unfamiliar language before you launch into activities. And yeah, this is the thing that we often talk about when we do a lead-in activity. The aim of the lead-in is to activate the schemata on a topic, okay, to get the students thinking about it before you do a skills task, okay. And it's been shown that the more thorough the lead-in and the more time the students have to activate the schemata to think about a topic, the better they will perform in the reading or writing task. Okay, so this is a really, really important stage of the lesson. Okay, making sure the students are well prepared and well informed about a topic before you go in to doing activities related to it. We also need to be prepared to adapt the material. Okay, this is again particularly important C1, C2 level. Okay, you might find that some of the material is a little bit dry for younger learners. Okay, and The Cambridge Exam Board have even said it is their intention to make reading texts dry and uninteresting because it increases the challenge. And so we need to find ways to liven up dry topics and texts, okay? Incorporate visual media into your lesson, okay? Break readings up. Turn it into a jigsaw reading, a running dictation, anything like that. Even doing a Kahoot for a reading, okay? It works really well, and it's just an interesting way of livening up dry topics. We need to take the lesson out of the course book as well, okay? These younger learners, they want fun, exciting activities, okay? If you just spend the whole lesson looking at the course book, you're going to have disengaged learners. And this doesn't just apply for younger, high achieving learners. This applies for all learners, really, okay? We need to take the lesson out of the course book, have other activities, like I said, jigsaw readings, running dictations, whatever, just making a variety of activities rather than spending the whole lesson looking at the coursework. And we need to find ways to help make the material relevant and help students connect with it. So if you've got, for example, I don't know, you're in C1 and you've got the topic of jobs, for example, most 15, 16-year-olds have no idea about what it's going to be like to have a job. Okay, and so we need to kind of make it relevant to them, okay, and say, right, well, you give them a situation. You want to go on holiday to Mallorca in the summer. However, your parents haven't got enough money to pay for it, so you need to find a summer job, okay, and you need to work. But what kind of summer job would you do? Would you work in McDonald's? Would you look after children, and so on and so forth? And so bring it back down to the sort of things that they could actually do, okay, and that way making the material more relevant so that they can actually connect with the topic is really, really important. It's also crucial to have something ready up your sleeve in case you have students that are fast finishers, okay? So for example, you've got these high achieving students in your classes, in your B2 class. B2, this is a particularly common situation. These high achieving students will often finish activities much more quickly than their classmates. They find it easy, they go through it, done. Okay, so it's important to have kind of extra activities or challenges for them to be doing while they wait for the other students in the class to catch up with them. Okay, so this could be, for example, looking for vocabulary in a text, writing a short text. Something that I did with John last year when I was teaching him was he was really interested in comics, and so I would just have a blank or several blank comic strips in the classroom, and I would say, okay, John, write me a short comic about the topic that we've been doing in class today. And he could draw really well, and he created brilliant little comic strips for me. And that was something that he could just work on every time that he had finished before the rest of the class. Okay, or you'll find now that most course books have extra handouts or photocopier activities that are related to the topic that you're doing in class. So it's a good idea just to have a couple of those next to you on your desk so that you can give those to any kind of high achieving student that has finished more quickly than the rest of their classmates. Okay, or very simply, a simple activity, if they have finished and you know you've got a weaker student in the class who struggles with this kind of activity, get the stronger student to help the weaker student with the activity. Okay, all right, so let's have a think. What activities can we do with these high achieving learners? So I've got a few examples here of coursebook pages that I think are, or that I have found in previous experience, were a little bit dry for my younger learners that I had in the class. Okay, so for example, what we have here is a page of a textbook about fashion. Okay, fashion, if you're 12, 13 and a boy, or maybe even girl as well, not particularly interested. Okay. And so I found myself thinking, how can I engage my students in this topic before I get them to do this reading task? Okay. And so a couple of things that I've done here with this one. I've shown images of crazy fashion choices. Okay. And I get the students to rate how fashionable the items are. Okay, this is a really fun way to lead into a topic of fashion. Okay, visuals, lots and lots of visuals on the board or on a handout. Okay, it naturally gets the students talking. They want to express themselves and say, oh my God, that looks ridiculous. Oh no, that's pretty cool, and so on and so forth. An alternative thing I found for fashion, I'm just going to show you a short video clip here. This is a topic: sustainability, being environmentally friendly is a really important topic for young people these days. And I found this lovely video here on sustainable fashion. I'll just show you a minute of it or so. And this is a particularly nice way to lead in to the topic. And you can get students talking about, would they wear these sustainable fashion items? So we just have a very short look at the video here. Okay, so you kind of get the idea. You get lots and lots of sustainable fashion items here, and then you can get the students to discuss, okay, would you wear that out? Do you think that's better than the kind of thing that you find in H&M, for example? And it generally generates quite a lot of interesting discussion among the students. Yeah. Okay, but this is an example of what I was talking about, having an interesting and engaging lead-in to the topic to kind of make it relevant to the students, rather than a dry text with a picture of an old-fashioned woman wearing black. Okay, and so yeah, just finding an interesting way to engage with the topic. Another potential issue is students not knowing what the writing task is or how to deal with the writing task. So this is an example of a C1 writing task. Students have to write a proposal. I tell a 14-year-old to write a proposal. What's a proposal? Okay, they have no idea. Okay, and so what can we do to kind of help students in this situation? Yeah, so the first thing is make sure that students have a model of the piece of writing that they have to produce. For me, this is absolutely essential. This doesn't just go for high achieving students, this goes for every student. Okay, if you want your students to produce a good piece of writing, they need to see an example of how it's done. Okay, so I always write a model for my students for the piece of writing that they are about to do. Okay, and then the key stage of the lesson is get them to analyze the model, pick out the typical language that is needed, the features of the piece of writing, the style. Okay, get them to analyze all of these things so that they can then replicate that in their own piece of writing. Okay, mine the model for useful language. Okay, write your own model, put in the language that you want the students to use, and then they can take it out and use it themselves. Okay, there's nothing wrong with students stealing from their teacher. Plan collaboratively. Planning when you've got a writing like this, when it's an unfamiliar task, is really, really important. So first of all, get your students to plan together in pairs, and then put a whole class plan on the board that the students can use when they're doing that piece of writing. Okay, a piece of writing that is well planned will inevitably be much better and much higher quality than a piece of writing that has just been done without a plan. And finally, once the students have done their piece of writing, we mentioned this earlier in the webinar, give the students detailed feedback on their writing. Okay, give them feedback on what they have done well and what they can improve on. These two things are really, really important. Not just the things that they need to improve on, but also the things that they have done well, okay? And then the next time they can retain the things that they did well in the previous lesson and incorporate new things based on the feedback that you have given them. Okay. And my final suggestion is get the students to do some research themselves. Okay, this is an example of a page from a proficiency book here. Okay, and it's got some questions here about the use of water. Okay, if you give a group of 16-year-olds these questions, they're not going to be able to answer them. Okay, so why not get the students to find out about unfamiliar topics before you go into a task? Okay, if you've got a task like this with lots of questions, this could be something they do for homework, or you could do it directly in class because they've got their smartphones. Get them to Google the answers to these questions. Okay, there's no need for them just to have to talk about it without having the answers when they've got all of this technology at their fingertips. Okay, so getting students to research and find out about unfamiliar topics is a really good way of engaging them in the task and activating the schemata before you go into these skills tasks that come later on in the course book. Okay, if you want to practice students' speaking skills, they could even give presentations on what they've found out about certain topics. Okay, it's a really good way of getting the students to collaborate, gets the students speaking to each other, gets the students interested in the topic, and yeah, generally is a good way of getting younger students to work together with older students, having a good collaborative task in the class. And the students can learn from each other. Okay, if you've got a couple of different topics coming up, you get one student or one group of students to research one section and another group of students to research another, and then they can all learn from each other. And then dealing with the topic when it comes up in a reading text or a listening text or whatever is much easier once they've been given that information by their fellow students. Okay, so just to review the things that I've talked about in this session today. Okay, first of all, it's very, very important for us to make sure that we are as ambitious as our students. Okay, our students want to do well, so it's important that we push them to make sure that they can do well. We should be ambitious for them. Okay, we shouldn't be holding back students just because of their age. Okay, or because we're worried that they are much younger than their classmates. If they're ready to go to a B2 class or a C1 class, we should put them in that class, and then we should make the class challenging for them, pushing them as much as possible. Okay, once you've got them in these classes with older students, find out who works well in groups or pairs with the younger students and try to use those pairings on a regular basis. And in that way, your younger students will feel much more comfortable in a class with the older ones. It's important to have thorough lead-in activities for unfamiliar topics. This has kind of been the theme of my webinar, really. Make sure that the topic is well prepared before you're asking the students to do any kind of activity or task related to that topic. Okay, the more they know about the topic in advance, the easier, the more achievable that task will be for the students. Be prepared to adapt material to make it more age appropriate. This is particularly important, as I said, when you get to C1 and C2 level, making sure that the material is student friendly, age appropriate, and that might mean getting out of the course book, finding alternative things for the students to look at before you do a reading task, for example. Feedback is essential. Okay, these students want it, they need it. It's really, really important to them. So make sure that we are giving our students detailed feedback on all the work that they're doing, telling them what they've done well and what they can improve on. Both of these things are really, really important. Okay, and finally, give the students support with the technique required for the exam tasks. Okay, this is also particularly important when they're jumping up levels very, very quickly, and they're suddenly doing an exam which has got tasks that they haven't seen before, and they don't know how to do it. Okay, so it's not just focusing on the content or the language. They also need guidance on the technique for how to deal with a particular reading task, or if you're doing the Cambridge exams, use of English task, for example. They might never have seen this kind of task before, and so it's really, really important that we support them and give them training on the techniques for those different exams. Okay, and so this is an important part of the learning process as well, not just content, but also how to deal with the task itself. Okay, so that's pretty much it from me this morning. Does anybody have any questions about anything that I talked about, or anything that I didn't talk about that you would like to know about? Okay, anything that I haven't mentioned or have mentioned that you would like to know more about, please ask me in the Q&A, because I don't think the chat is working. Okay, I think I've turned the chat on now, so if you want to type into the chat, you can. I think I've turned it on now, so it should work now if you want to type to me into the chat. So Stella has just asked a very interesting question. Do you think that publishers will start adapting course books and take into consideration the fact that students have a higher level at a younger age? I think so. I think it's definitely achievable at sort of B2 level. Publishers are starting to produce course books that are more relevant for teens and younger teens. I particularly like the Optimize series, which is particularly good for younger teenagers. And at the London School, we have been doing a kind of bit of research and looking for course books on for C2 level, and we have found some C2 level course books that are kind of relevant for teenagers. And so I think publishers are starting to realize that they need to produce course books for younger levels or for younger ages. However, we have to remember as well that particular C1 and C2 exams, they don't have a for schools version. And so students do need to be familiar with these difficult topics. Okay. Otherwise, when they get into the exam, it's going to be a shock. Okay. And so I don't think that for those higher levels, they can completely change the content and make it completely teen relevant, because then they won't be preparing thoroughly enough for the exam. But generally speaking, I think publishers are getting better, and they are taking into consideration the fact that students do have a higher level at a younger age. Yeah. Any other questions? You're welcome, Stella. Okay, no more questions? That's an interesting question, Stella, about students that are not mature enough to understand some grammar structures. I don't think maturity I don't think the issue is that they're not mature enough to understand the grammar structure. I think you can teach the grammar structure to whatever age group, as long as they have the ability. Okay, what might be more the issue here is that some grammar structures require quite a lot of explanation and clarification. And then these younger students, your example here, 6 are primary and passive, they may not have the attention span for that kind of grammar structure. Okay, what I think you need to do here is try to make your grammar lessons as deductive as possible. Okay, so rather than it being teacher fronted and the teacher explaining the grammar to the students, make it more student fronted. What I mean by this is that having lots and lots of examples of the grammar on the page, okay, of the grammar structure that you want to teach, and then having guiding questions to get the students to work out the rules for themselves. If you've got these high achieving learners, so they're from 6 of primary, but you're already teaching them the passive, for example, they have the ability to use it. They have the ability to work it out, most definitely. Okay, so you just need to find a deductive way where the students are involved in the language clarification process, and then they can work out the rules for themselves. Okay, and then they are better able to understand and deal with the grammar than if the teacher is still at the front doing a language presentation or grammar presentation on the board. Okay, so if it's more student fronted, students working out the rules for themselves, they are much more likely to engage with that and then retain the information when it comes to more complex grammatical structures at a young age. Okay, so it's presenting them with the language in a context and then getting them to work out how to use that language themselves. Does that answer your question, Stella? That's great. Thank you. So any more questions before I finish? Okay. All right then. So if you do think of any more questions after the webinar, you can always contact me. Here's my email address, alex@london-school.com. You can also look at our website, london-school.com, or follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Okay. Please sign up for the next webinar that's coming up in the new year. Okay, we look forward to seeing you there. Okay, and yeah, if you do have any questions in the meantime, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. Okay, and yeah, we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Thank you very much for joining us today. Take care. Goodbye.